Good morning. My name's Sarah Gary and I'm Chief Executive of the Property Care Association. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. For those of you who don't know the Property Care Association, we are the leading representative organisation for the UK's building protection industry. Our skilled and audited membership operate across domestic, commercial and civil sectors in the structural repair, structural waterproofing, wood preservation, damp protection, ventilation, flood remediation and invasive weed control industries. Before we head into today's webinar, just a couple of notes from myself. Your microphones have been muted because there are several of you on the line today. However, if you would like to ask a question, please do pop that in the chat function. We will be taking those questions at the end, so you have got 30 or 40 minutes to pop those in the chat, and I will ask those questions of our speaker a bit later. Depending on your question, we might not be able to give you specific advice today on a specific situation you might have, but if you do have a specific question, I'm sure Leanne would be happy to pick that up with you at a later date, and she'll be sharing her contact details as part of this presentation. So before we get cracking, part of the PCA's mission is to support members' business growth and also to provide routes to high quality career progression. And that's one of the reasons that we invited Leanne here to be with us today. So Leanne is from the new Entrant Support Team at CITB, and Leanne and her team focus on supporting those who are in scope to CITB, so may not pay the levy, but they are in scope, to attract new people into their businesses. The feedback that we've received from all of our members is that it is a real struggle for you to recruit new talent into your businesses, particularly at a younger or more junior level within those businesses. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Leanne, who's going to set out some of the support that CITB and the NEST team is able to provide organisations with to help attract new entrants to their businesses. Thank you,
Sarah. Good morning.
I think we're just moving your slides on, Leanne.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invite, Sarah. My name is Leanne Land, and I am the head of the new Entrant Support Team at CITB. If you can just move to the next slide, please. So yeah, this team is quite a new team. We were set up in 2022 as a bit of a pilot because construction employers were telling us that they needed more support with understanding the apprenticeship landscape. It was very complex, it was very confusing, knowing how to support an apprentice or a trainee at work, finding the right provider, finding the right applicant. There was a lot of challenges that employers were facing. So as a result of this, we agreed to set up a bit of a pilot, which, like I say, it was in the north of England, to increase apprenticeship and construction training update. The pilot started in the north in September 22. And it was quickly identified that the feedback coming back from industry, coming back from stakeholders was really positive. In the first few months, we'd supported over 500 employers to recruit apprentices. So at the start of 2023, the decision was made to roll out the team on a national basis so we could roll out the support nationally to support more employers with the challenges they were facing. Can just go to the next slide, please. So the team that, like I said, we have a national team now, so we have coverage in England, Scotland and Wales, and there's a number of advisors, local advisors across the country who are supporting employers with two different aspects. So the first aspect is supporting everything around recruiting apprentices. So this is very bespoke to every individual employer. Every individual employer is asking for different support. So I've just put a few points down here as to some of the things that we are supporting with and that we have had great success with over the last couple of years. We're supporting employers to register their vacancies on a number of portals to attract quality applicants. So at the moment, we use a system called Talent View. However, that system is being upgraded and we are due to roll out a new system in April of this year, which is really going to help with the matching process as well. So we help to advertise the employers' vacancies on Talent View, on the apprenticeship service, on Go Construct. We're liaising with training providers, so we're liaising with over 260 training providers nationally, so we can discuss with training providers what applicants they have on full-time courses to try to support the employer to match their vacancy to a quality applicant. We're working with employers to determine if they can deliver the scope of the selected apprenticeship. So just making sure that the work that the young person or the individual is going to be doing will meet that of the required apprenticeship. And this is the apprenticeship standard. We go through the responsibilities of the workplace mentor, and what the employer is required to do to support that apprentice, outlining key things around the apprenticeship standard, the endpoint assessment, and the employer's responsibilities around that. We support the employer to secure funding, so we can set up their digital account to secure funding from the government, and obviously also access the CITB grants, which I'm going to come on to a bit later in the presentation. And also any travel to train funding and accommodation expenses as well. So if the individual, if there's no local provision, no local training provision, and the individual has to travel out of area, we can provide funding for travel and accommodation, and we support the employer to access that as well. Like I say, it's very bespoke to each employer, but this just gives you an idea of some of the things that we are supporting with. And if we can move to the next slide, please. And the other aspect that we're supporting employers with, it's not just about recruiting apprentices, because we know there's a number of challenges with recruiting individuals, but it's also retaining them. Currently, the national benchmark for retention and achievement is around 50% in the construction industry. So we're keen to improve this. We're keen to support employers to retain their apprentices. So we're developing this support on a regular basis based on feedback and research that we've got, because we know the majority of the high proportion of individuals leave the industry or leave their apprenticeship. There's two main reasons. The first reason is that they don't feel supported by their employer, and secondly that they have difficulty passing the endpoint assessment. So we are linking and signposting with a number of key stakeholders who can support employers, because what we're finding in the feedback we're getting from employers like yourself is that some employers have never employed an apprentice before, so they've never mentored an apprentice before. They're facing issues with their individual, such as mental health. The individuals need additional support. They have mental health support needs, and the employers that we're working with don't know where to go for that support. So we're providing that ongoing support through the Nest advisors, and we're also linking with key stakeholders who can provide that support as well. We conduct regular check-ins with employers every 12 weeks just to check everything's going okay with that apprentice, everything's going okay with the training provider, and with that kind of point of contact to be the three-way conversation, if you like. So if there's an issue with the provider or the apprentice, we can intervene and help support that. And we've also developed an employer pack, which has got a range of things that are supporting employers, from everything from inducting their apprentices, mentoring their apprentices, how to review and do regular progress reviews with their apprentices, how to pull together an employment contract for their apprentice. So again, all of the things, all of the feedback that we've been getting from employers, we've put this together in an employer pack. And if we can go to the next slide, please. But we've also developed a work-based mentor overview. So if you just go to the next page, please. So we developed this. This is a 3-hour training session. We developed this with industry, so we developed it with employers. And this session is to provide an in-depth understanding of how the apprenticeship standard work and the crucial role of that of the workplace mentor. As I say, this is a 3-hour session. And so far in the last year and a half since we've rolled this out, we've had over 500 mentors go through this. We are now working with a number of training providers nationally who are going to be delivering this as well. So we can really start promoting it because we've been delivering it in-house up until this point. But the feedback we've had from all of the employers who have attended this has been really positive. And if we can move to the next slide, please. This just gives you an overview of what is covered in the workplace mentor standard. It goes through what the apprenticeship standards are, which a lot of feedback we've had from employers. A lot of employers still were of the kind of the perception that their apprentice was doing an MVQ, but obviously apprenticeship standards, there's no longer MVQs. So we give a bit of an overview of what the apprenticeship standard is, what the apprenticeship standard activity will be, so what the individual will be working towards, so the employer has that knowledge and can support the apprentice, what the employer and apprentice expectations and responsibilities are, what the employer's role of the mentor is, and golden rules and good practices to support that employer. Because like I say, a lot of the employers we've been working with are small and micro employers who maybe haven't taken on an apprentice before. So we give them support on how to structure conversations, how to give effective feedback to their apprentice. And it's also quite an interactive session. So there's example situations and how the employer can support the apprentice if they're facing certain barriers or conflicts. And there's some case studies in there as well. And like I say, it is a 3-hour session, but the feedback has been really well received. So we will be doing a whole new promotion campaign in the new year around that, because we want as many employers as we can to go through this standard. If we can move to the next slide, please. Just to give you an overview of the grants provided by CITB. So we have an Interwork grant, which is a relatively new grant. This is in a pilot phase at the moment, but this is to encourage employers to take on full-time learners. So those learners that are in college doing either a full-time construction diploma or possibly a T-level. They're doing a full-time program, but as part of that program, they have an element of work experience. So if you as an employer take on one of these individuals on a work placement of a minimum of 30 hours, there is a £500 grant available for taking that individual on. And you know, if that individual works out well, if you're keen to progress that individual into either an apprenticeship or employment, there's an additional grant there available of £1,000 if you then successfully take on that individual for 3 months or more. So there's £1,500 potentially for that Interwork grant. So far, the feedback we've had has been really well received, and it's allowing employers to, perhaps where they've struggled to recruit applicants or individuals before, they're able to take someone work placement before committing to employ them. And it's also given the individual an opportunity to have a taste of on-site, see what it's like. So it's been really well received, that grant. We also have the apprenticeship grants. So the apprenticeship grants are currently sitting at £2,500 per year for attendance grants, and that's paid in quarterly instalments throughout the year. And then if the individual achieves the endpoint assessment and successfully achieves their apprenticeship, there's also an additional £3,500 achievement grant there as well. We currently have an incentive bonus at the moment to try to drive up the number of interior system installers in the industry. So there's an additional £2,000 incentive for if you take on an individual within that trade. And as I mentioned earlier in the slides, we have a travel to train scheme. So if the individual, if there's no local provision and they have to travel out of area, we can provide up to 80% of the accommodation costs, which is reimbursed back to the employer to cover the individual's overnight accommodation costs. And also if their travel expenses exceed £20 a week or more, we will support with travel expenses as well. And again, that is paid directly to the employer. And I think that is my slides. Thank you for that. I'm happy to take any questions, or if you want to wait till the end, Sarah, that's absolutely fine.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Leanne. I have a couple of slides that I'm going to share as well that just continue on from Leanne's presentation. Before we do that, I just had a quick question for you, Leanne, about the number of people that you've helped so far. So you said in your pilot phase, you'd helped around 500 placements happen. So matching employers with students. Do you know what your figures are to date?
So far, we've supported over 5,000 employers.
Wow.
And that is everything from apprenticeships, work placements, FE work placements. We've come into contact with employers who already have individuals, but they weren't claiming any funding. So we've supported those. But yeah, in total, it's over 5,000 employers that we've supported.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Leanne. We'll come back to Leanne shortly. But Natalie, in the meantime, if you could just share my slides and I'll carry on. So Leanne really helpfully spoke about some of the apprenticeship grants that are available and apprenticeships, and we know from our members that many of you work in a multi-skilled environment. So some of you will work in the damp and timber sector, some of you might work in structural waterproofing, but your teams will need a variety of skills. So it may be that you choose to take on apprentices in things like dry lining or plastering, or it may be that you are looking to bring people in to gain specific skills within the damp and timber or the structural waterproofing sectors. Apprenticeships mean a very specific thing in England, and there has to be an apprenticeship standard registered with the government, and there are only so many of those standards that are actually apprenticeships. So things like plastering and dry lining are, and usually they're available to access locally. I won't go into too much of the detail, but Leanne's team would be able to help you to access those apprenticeships if that's something you're interested in. For our sector, we offer something called Specialist Applied Skills Programs, or SAPs. And the difference with the SAP is really the size and the specialism of the sector. Damp and timber and structural waterproofing is so specialist that unfortunately it doesn't quite hit the bar for us being able to write an apprenticeship standard for that in England. Basically, there are too few people that would want to register on that programme that makes it unviable for us to register a standard. So we've worked with CITB, and several years ago we introduced the SAP. And you can see on the screen there what the SAP is. It's made up of a number of modules and training courses which provide new entrants to the industry with a very clear progression route to achieving their NVQ. I'm not sure if you can see that under my image in the bottom right hand corner, but the outcome of the 18-month programme would usually be that the apprentice or the SAP delegate leaves with an NVQ level 2, either in wood preserving and damp proofing or in structural waterproofing. Next slide, please, Natalie. So this course is delivered at our head office in Huntingdon, where we have a practical training facility. As I said earlier, the challenge we have with these two particular niche specialist occupations is that there are very few colleges that would be willing to offer it due to the small number of people that undertake it each year. So the PCA has invested in the facilities to allow employers to come to us and be centrally trained. And again, you can see on the screen there the list of the syllabus and what would be included in that. Generally, the SAP takes place, thank you, Natalie. Generally, the SAP takes place over week-long blocks of 4 to 5 weeks throughout that the first year. And the follow-up 6-month period is undertaking the NVQ at the workplace, which would be a variety of sites. Thanks, Natalie. Next slide. So just a little bit more information about what the SAP looks like. As Leanne was saying earlier, there are some grants available which support employers. So if you are an in-scope CITB employer, you will be eligible for some funding, which is around £1,800 at the moment off the cost of your SAP. And then there's further grant payable once your apprentice, your SAP delegate, completes their NVQ. And we appreciate that travelling to Huntingdon is not easy if you are based in Belfast or you're based in Scotland. And so the 80% of accommodation costs, we can help support you via Leanne's team to access that travel to train grant. Next slide, please, Natalie. Thank you. So just in terms of intakes, we do try and have 1 or 2 intakes of both programmes each year. But if you are interested in registering somebody quite quickly, there are the dates of our next 2 cohorts. Thanks, Natalie. So I'm going to bring Leanne back now for any questions that we might have. And whilst we're waiting for those to come in, I've actually got a couple of questions for you, Leanne, which I hope is okay. My privilege of being the chair. I thought that the mentorship program that you had available looks fantastic. There are lots of employers on the line, as you said, who will probably never have taken on an apprentice or usually a young person coming into the business. How can they access that? How readily available is that? Where do they go for further information?
If anybody's interested in that, if you just contact the new entrant team, the contact details were on or contact me direct, and I can arrange for a local advisor to make contact with you to discuss training providers we have available. As I say, we were delivering this in-house, but because of the demand, we've now gone out to a number of training providers nationally, and we're running this through the employer networks. So there won't be a cost for doing the training, and we can source either a face-to-face session or a virtual session, whichever you would prefer to do, because we are operating them both face-to-face and virtually as well, because some employers are preferring to do that virtually.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Natalie has just posted the details of that in the chat as well, so the email address is there. Yeah. We've spoken a little bit as we've gone through the session about being in scope to CITB. Yeah. And most of our members will be in scope to CITB, but I imagine there are some that perhaps aren't registered with CITB because they weren't aware of the benefits that they could have with being registered. what should somebody do if they've had no prior engagement with CITB but are really interested in the support package that you can offer?
Again, they just need to contact the new Entrant Support Team, and we can arrange to register that employer. I think there still is a bit of a myth in the industry that if employers register with CITB that they're going to be hit with a huge levy bill, and in a lot of cases, particularly with the SMEs and micros, because of the size of their wage bill, which again we can discuss in more detail, but the majority of the employees that we're working with don't pay us a levy, but they can still access all of the grants because they're under that threshold. So you're still eligible for grants even if you're not paying the CITB levy, but you do need to register with CITB. But again, if you contact the new Entrant Support Team, we can arrange to have a discussion with you and see if that's right for you to register.
That's fantastic, Leanne, particularly because we know that at least 75% of our members are fewer than 5 employees.
Yeah.
So it's great to know that they would be able to access that support with little or no levy being payable.
Yeah, and we do have a calculator on the website as well. So even if somebody wasn't quite sure if they wanted to contact the new Entrant Support Team, you can go onto the website and just put the calculations in there as to your PAYE, and it will give you an indication if you will need to pay CITB levy or not.
Fantastic, thank you. Before we move on to the questions in the chat, I just have one further question on younger apprentices. So I think generally most of our members would take on those over 18, but obviously you could become an apprentice at 16 years old. Is there anything additional that employers should be thinking about if they want to take on a younger apprentice rather than an adult?
No, again, all employers that take on apprentices will need to be vetted through the relevant training provider as to who the training provider are, and you will need liability insurance as well. But no, there's no any additional requirements for a 16, 18 than an 18 plus.
Thank you. So we've now got a question regarding career aspirations and how we encourage new entrants into the industry. So I know this perhaps falls slightly outside of your team's work, Leanne, but Jervis there's commented, how do we spark the imagination of young people to want to enter the construction industry, and particularly the damp and timber and structural waterproofing sector? Is there anything that CITB is doing to support younger people getting that career aspiration to work in the industry?
Yeah, we have been having a number of conversations internally around this lately, because from an ITB point of view, we don't do careers type work because it's not in our remit. But what we do is work with key influencers, key stakeholders, and use construction ambassadors, which are construction employers, to raise the profile. But we're doing a lot of marketing and comms on our Go Construct platform. Particularly, I know that there was a comment there about short and snappy videos. That's definitely the way that we could, because that's where the young people are. That is what is catching their attention. So we're doing a number of videos that we're trying to promote through not just our social media platforms, but our key stakeholders. We're doing a huge campaign at the moment, which we're not going to do National Apprenticeship Week campaign because that's a week, and most organisations do something around that week, so the message kind of gets drowned out and we don't really have that much of an impact. So what we're doing instead is developing a toolkit. So this will be a toolkit that will have short videos, it will have social media assets that we can circulate to key stakeholders, employers, so we can get the message out on a lot wider scale. But if there's certain trades, as you mentioned, Sarah, that where we're looking to really increase the profile, increase activity around this, we can look at some targeted campaigns around this. So it's probably worth us having a conversation. And if we can capture people out on site doing this type of work and then use our platforms and our network to promote that, That's what we wanted to get to. And we've also started to test the water and pilot working with social media influencers, so where it's young people in the industry where they've got large followings, because again that is where the young people are spending their time. So we're trying to promote the industry through those platforms as well. So there's a number of things that we're working on at the minute, but yeah, particularly if there's certain trades where we really need to promote, then we're happy to engage with that.
Thank you. And I think that's something that we'd be happy to work more closely with both members and with CITB on. I know I have been in touch with the Go Construct team already to talk about the web pages on the CITB website and making sure they're up to date and they're still relevant. So I would say to any of our members on the line, if you do have video content, whether that's nicely edited or not, photos, interesting case studies, please do get in touch with me. And that's something that we can both share through our website and through the Go Construct team.
Yeah.
So we've got another question in the chat from Graham. Can CITB help to vet potential apprentices to ensure the best chance of success for both employer and apprentice?
Because we're not the training provider, our contact or our support isn't directly with the young person, because that would sit with the training provider, who I would expect to do that level of vetting and checking, because all apprentices need to pass a certain criteria for the relevant apprenticeship, depending on where the training provider is. But what we can do is support the employer with the recruitment and induction process, so we can ensure that because obviously ultimately it's the employer that is employing that individual, but we can support with interviewing the individual, not physically being involved in the interviews, but giving support around effective interviewing with that individual, how to do initial assessment if the employer wants to do that, so that the employer could undergo those checks with the individual. We've also got the interwork placement grant as well, so that allows the employer the opportunity to take on a young person as a placement before committing to employ them as well.
And I think that's a fantastic idea, because it's a great route, isn't it, to test somebody out, try before you buy, make sure they're going to fit in with your organisation's culture. And the construction T level, we haven't really talked about that, but it is a relatively new qualification. It was introduced only a couple of years ago. The construction T level basically gives people a grounding in construction skills, doesn't it? So your year one is spent doing a variety of construction trades, providing them with an overall grounding in the industry. And then in year two, they go on to specialise, normally in things like painting and decorating and bricklaying, plastering. I think, Leanne, you're nodding, so I must be right.
Brick, joinery, plastering and P&D are the on-site T levels at the moment. And with the on-site T levels, they do have quite a significant period where they need to do work placement. So that is a great opportunity for an employer to take on one of the T level students on regular placements before committing to employing that individual. And again, if that's something that you would be interested in, we are engaged with the providers that are offering the T levels, and we can support the employer with a placement and an individual to go out on placement.
I think that's a fantastic way to maybe address Graham's point, because with that work experience, as we said, you get to try before you buy. You know, they've got their basic health and safety, their basic knowledge of how to work on a construction site or in a residential property, that kind of customer service skill. And then it's more about cultural fit, and will this sector be the right fit for that particular young person. So that's a great way, and you get paid to take that person on as well, so even better.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Leanne, thank you so much. It doesn't look like we have any more questions, so I'm going to leave it there. So a huge thank you to you and to everybody on the call for attending. If your colleagues have missed out on today's webinar, it will be available in probably after Christmas now on our website and on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing details of that, particularly in the run-up to Apprenticeship Week. But before I sign off, assuming the survey pops up on your screen at the end, please do take the opportunity to complete it, because it's really helpful for us to know whether we're doing the right webinars or you'd like to see other things. Otherwise, thank you all once again, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thanks, Leanne.
Thanks.